Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Devo Maheshwara Guru Sakshat Parabrahma Guru Sakshat Parabrahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha.
What have you studied from Descartes to the fringe of Kant? You have to recall it. Descartes is known for his methodology. Cogito ergo sum, I doubt, therefore I exist. That is his contribution. When he talks of interaction, he takes it for granted that matter and mind both are real. There is interaction means both are real, matter and mind. You go to Spinoza, both are attributes of God, parallelism. Descartes advocated interactionism. Spinoza advocates parallelism. Both are real, both are attributes of God. You have to bear in mind, countless are the attributes of God. We know only two because of our faulty minds, our deficient intelligence. And then comes Leibniz. He talks of the reality of spiritual units called monads. Monads are windowless, as I told you. Windowless means there is no communication amongst one another. If there is no communication, how is there so much harmony? A sort of symphony, even a sort of musical arrangement. It is a perfect order, perfect union, perfect arrangement. And if you use the philosophical word, it is teleological, it is purposive. Otherwise, it cannot be that harmonious, systematic, and full of arrangement. These three are rationalists. What is rationalism? I told you rationalism means those who advocate the theory that all knowledge is possible through the agency of the mind only. Whatever knowledge you get is through the agency of the mind only. The mind is all in all. And you saw at the end also yesterday that mind and matter both are cancelled. That is where we arrived yesterday at the end of the period. These are all these three, Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, are rationalists. They believe in the agency of the mind. And as against these rationalists, there are the three empiricists, as I told you, Locke, Berkeley, and Hume. They believe in the very opposite of what the rationalists hold. The mind, at the beginning, is a tabula rasa. Tabula rasa means a clean slate, just as this blackboard is clean. At the moment, it is a clean slate. This is what Locke says. Meaning, the mind is not a worthwhile agency. It has no contribution of its own to make in the acquisition of knowledge. The mind at the beginning is a tabula rasa, and the first letter on it is written by the sense. He is an empiricist. Empiricist is one who, of course, in the theory of knowledge, this is theory of knowledge, which is almost a headache in philosophy. But in any case, you have to read it. Those who believe that all knowledge is received from sensation, and you should also know the meaning of the word sensation. What is sensation? I'll tell you. I have told you already, but I'll tell you again. They are empiricists. Empiricists means those who go by experience, and experience is of the senses. The mind at the beginning is a tabula rasa, and the first letter on it is written by sense. When you say matter is real, you are accepting matter is something outside you which exists in spite of yourself or along with you. You accept it. When you say matter is real, it means this thing. It is something outside you which sends you vibrations which you receive, which you order into a meaningful whole, W-H-O-L-E. First day I told you to keep in mind the use of this word, whole. It is very important word in philosophy. And that is how you get knowledge. How you get knowledge you will see today. But it is what they mean to say. Locke is a little confused. I shouldn't use the word confused. Locke is a little ambiguous also, in the sense he says, matter is to us unknown and unknowable. I have told you this already. Unknown and unknowable. Yet, whatever awareness or knowledge we have of matter is through our qualities only. Now see, there is a final distinction, fine distinction here. He says matter has two sets of qualities, primary qualities and secondary qualities. Primary qualities belong to the object, secondary qualities belong to the beholder, to the experiencer. Primary qualities are volume, measurement, dimension. These are primary qualities. Figure. They belong to the object. They do not belong to you. You have to accept as they are. Secondary qualities belong to the beholder, to the experiencer. What pleases you, what does not please you, varies from man to man. It doesn't depend upon the object. Poets have found beauty in coal pits even. Coal pits, coal mines, they have found beauty. Lord Tennyson was an English poet known for his sonorous small pieces. He wrote a small poem, The Beggar Maid. The title of the poem is The Beggar Maid. A woman beggar, beggar maid means a woman beggar. He has written a poem, a small poem. A beggar ordinarily is not a very pleasant sight. Ordinarily. It may not be disgusting, but it is not pleasant, at least this is certain. He has written a poem, as I told you, and in the poem he writes, as shines the moon in clouded skies, she in her tattered attire was seen. See, as shines the moon in clouded skies, clouds are black, moon is white. How beautiful it looks. As shines the moon in clouded skies, she in her tattered attire was seen. Her torn clothes, she is a beggar. She is not a rich person. Her clothes are bound to be torn, and when she walks, they move, and afford a peep within up to her skin. She is a British woman, naturally white complexion. See the analogy, the complete analogy, how great beauty he has found in it. As shines the moon in clouded skies, she in her tattered attire was seen. So what do I mean to convey to you? Secondary qualities belong to the beholder. This is a great debate in literature also, in all literatures, whether beauty belongs to the object or to the beholder. It is a very great problem and issue. He says secondary qualities belong to us, to the beholder. Primary qualities belong to the object, meaning the object is real. When primary qualities belong to the object is real to that extent. After Locke, you heard, came Berkeley, Bishop Berkeley. Bishop, as I tell you, is a man who cannot think outside the idea of God. Bishop means this thing only. He cannot stand this concept of Locke, that matter can exist independently along with its primary qualities. Everything should belong to the beholder. There is no independent existence of matter or primary qualities. And his logic is very simple. He says, the reasons which Locke advanced for secondary qualities to belong to the beholder, those very reasons are valid for primary qualities also to belong to the beholder. Meaning nothing belongs to matter, everything, all experience belongs to the beholder, to the experiencer. Meaning there is no external agency of matter, and as I told you, his philosophy is esse est percipi. To exist is to be perceived. Very simply, how do you say a thing exists? It is perceived. Perceived meaning it is experienced. By whom? By someone or the other. If by none, then by God, he says. Bishop, natural answer. By God. That is his philosophy. After Locke, Berkeley comes Hume. In our study, after doesn't mean chronological. Chronologically it means not by date of birth. Hume, David Hume. David Hume, as I told you, is an skeptic. He believes in nothing. For him, nothing is permanent. It is all flux, a stream of consciousness. Things come and go. That's all. No permanence. And as I told you, he himself writes he cannot expect anything, yet he hopes and is certain things will happen. In the evening, he will go to the restaurant. All those things are there. Now see, what is the argument of Hume? Hume is most misunderstood. That is his tragedy. Hume never said the law of causation does not exist. He says you cannot prove it. You are an empiricist. You believe in the experience of the senses. Empiricist means this thing. The senses give you experience. It is the eye which tells you this is a thing, this is that thing. It is your smell which tells you this smell is, it is your nose which tells you this smell is good, that smell is not good. And like this, all these experiences you get from the senses. So, when your senses bring you the evidence, they do not bring the evidence of permanent law of causation. There is no permanence, there is nothing. We cannot prove it. But our life would not go without accepting in all these beliefs, in all these propositions. We have to live our lives, and life will go on like this only. As I told you, he says, when I look within myself, there is a stream of consciousness flowing. There is nothing like a permanent entity known as the mind. There is no mind, there is no permanent mind. He is a skeptic. He believes in none, as I told you, but he never faulted upon paying his rent. Never. A man who lives by the moment, never faulted upon paying his rent. On the other hand, was another philosopher, Schopenhauer, German philosopher Schopenhauer, who was never tired of repeating, Upanishads are the solace of my life, Upanishads are the solace of my death. I could, in the very first instance, understand what he means by saying Upanishads are the solace of my life. But till today I have not understood what he means by saying Upanishads are the solace of my death. How they are the solace of his death, I have not yet been able to understand. Anyway, his landlady once went to receive rent from him. In anger, he threw her down the staircase and that broke her leg. That is, at the other scale of belief, Hume never faulted upon paying his rent. Meaning, philosophically, he believed in the existence of the moment only, in nothing permanent, in nothing abiding, nothing stable. Yet in day-to-day behavior, dealings, he was above board always. Hume says, there is no mind, where is mind? I see only a stream of consciousness flowing. Where is mind? There is no mind. No law of causation can be posited, can be proved, and therefore simply because force of habit we believe this effect will follow from this cause, there is no reason for that. It may not follow. All men die, they are mortal. Maybe someday some man may not die. And of course you don't see all men dying before your very eyes. This was Hume. Now here you have arrived. Nothing is left behind for you to stand upon. Neither matter nor mind. Matter has been cancelled finally by Berkeley and mind has been cancelled finally by Hume. Now what do you do in philosophy? You have no job, you have been rendered idle, unemployed. In this situation rose, as I told you yesterday, Kant, Immanuel Kant, K-A-N-T, Kant. You need not write the full name, Immanuel. That is also very easy, I-M-M-A-N-U-E-L, Immanuel Kant. What is his job? His job is cut out for him. He undertakes the re-examination of the process of knowledge. Why? Knowledge we are getting at every moment of our life. This is proved. This is beyond any doubt. This is an axiomatic truth. You cannot deny it. Knowledge you are getting all right. The question is, how are you getting it? That is the issue. Kant is accepted to be the hardest philosopher to study. That way he is very simple, very sublime. When you have a look at his ethical system, you will get to know yourself firsthand. His epistemology, meaning theory of knowledge, is the hardest nut to crack. And not so much for the depth and weight of idea, but because of the terminology he uses. German philosophers find their language inadequate to express their thought and therefore they coin their own phraseology. They make their own words and use them. They are very difficult and very ambiguous because they are not current. But always remember one thing. Howsoever hard the thing, it is always softed at the center. At the center it is always softest. And whatever complications and difficulties it may present, its central thesis is always simple. You have all heard of Benazir Bhutto, isn't it? You all know about her. One thing perhaps you do not know, or very few of you know, she is an author also. You know she is an author. Then you nodded very positively. Anyway, good. You nodded because you heard me ask you this question. Anyway, she is an author also. Author means she has written a book. She has written a book, Daughter of the East. It's a good book, good for reading once. Not a book of permanent value, but good informative book for the time being. In the book she mentions an incident. She was sent to study at Harvard. They are very rich feudal lords. The book is interesting to read. Her father, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, before she left the country, took her to their family graveyard and told her, "See, your bones belong to this land. You be wherever you are, but do not forget this fact." She was sent to study at Harvard. She found the job almost impossible for her. Their methodology of teaching is entirely different from ours. We deliver lectures here every day. They deliver a lecture once a month only. Not particularly Harvard only, even in India, in the Indian Law Institute at Delhi, they deliver a lecture, one lecture in 1 month. You are given material to study from the library. Every day 6 hours of reading, personal reading. That is the way. Anyway, she wrote back to her father that she was not able to continue. She found it difficult to carry on. She wanted to return home. Her father wrote back, "See, the peripheral details may be very complicated and difficult to grasp, but the central thesis is always very simple. You get at the central thesis, you pick it up, and all peripheral details will follow by themselves." This is what he wrote her back. She had a very brilliant career, you know it very well. So, howsoever difficult Kant may be, he has been made very simple for you, and all his logic stands to reason. At the age of 54, till recently people used to retire at the age of 55. About 40, 50 years ago, the retirement age was 55. At the age of 54, he wrote a book, Critique of Pure Reason. The title of the book is Critique of Pure Reason. He gave it to his friend Herz. His name was Herz. He asked his friend to read the book. Herz returned it after some days, telling him he was hardly half through the book. Half through the book, he is returning, fearing if he goes any further, he may go mad. This is what he told Kant. He is difficult because of the terminology he uses, otherwise the web and the mechanism is very simple. He finds first hand that knowledge is an impossibility, and yet knowledge is possible at every step. What is this dichotomy? What is this problem? What is this enigma? He examines it, and he titled his book Critique of Pure Reason. Critique means analysis, understanding, not criticism. Pure reason means that knowledge which is generated by the agency of the mind and not by the senses. It means this thing. Now what he does? He says, there is matter outside, you are getting vibrations, your senses receive, and as I told you the process yesterday, There are areas earmarked for the senses. There is turbulence. There is some vibration. The mind wakes up and asks, what is it? And the mind gives an answer. That is the process of knowledge. You, as I told you yesterday, do not know firsthand what the tree is. You only know the image of the tree. In your mind, what you have is the image of the tree, is a photograph of the tree, not the tree itself. How do you know the tree is real or not? You have not seen the tree truly even once. How can you know it? You cannot know it. There is a difference, therefore, between awareness or sensation and perception. This also you understand with the help of an example, you will understand it better. You see something in the distance, you feel there is something in the distance. You concentrate for a while more and you see it is shaking. You still more concentrate and find it is walking. Is it animal or a human being? After a little while you get to know it is not an animal, it is a human being. You want to know who he is, man or woman. Say, after a while you get to know it is a man. Then you are curious to know who this man is. You concentrate for a little while more. The object comes nearer. You are able to see and find, oh, he is my friend. You realize at once he is your friend. You say, he is my friend. Now see, you started from where there is something. It was just awareness. You knew there is something. A newborn child also has awareness. If you bring a newborn child into the room, it has awareness of the fan, the tube light, everything, the desk, the furniture, everything. It has awareness. A raw, crude sensation, as it is called. A mere awareness it has. But you can give a meaning to it. This is a desk, this is a table, this is a watch, this is tube light. This meaning you have given to the object, this is called perception. Your senses bring you sensation. Awareness they bring you, they do not bring you the meaning. How do you give the meaning? And you don't receive all the vibrations. Take an example, there is a mother sleeping by the side of an infant child. Her child, sleeping soundly. Even if a bomb were to fall, she would not get up. But if the child stirs a little even, she will at once wake up. She will at once wake up. Why? The purpose in her mind is to be caring for the child. The child moves, she gets up at once. Who has given in the purpose? Purpose your mind has chosen. You do not receive all vibrations. There is someone in the class coming, asking, is he here? We say, no, he is not here, he goes away. He goes out and we ask him, was Mr. Y there? He says, no, I didn't observe. I didn't observe. He came to the class, he saw the whole class. He says, I didn't observe because he did not have the purpose to see whether that person is here or not. Meaning, all your actions are purposive. Who gives the purpose? The sense cannot and does not. What vibrations will be accepted? I am receiving vibrations, you are receiving vibrations from everything in the room. From that clock, this wall, this window, this, that, everything. But you are not accepting them. You are accepting one only, my voice. Your purpose is this only. You are walking on a road. there is a stone lying by the side. You feel the stone, you find it is hot or warm, whatever it is. You look up and you say, oh, the sun is the cause of the stone being hot. You have seen the stone, you have seen the sun, you have seen the cause. Cause you have not seen. How do you say the sun is the cause of the hot stone? You have seen the hot stone only. Follow me alertly. You have seen the sun only, and you say the sun is the cause of the hot stone. How do you say? It is your mind which has supplied the link, which has supplied the reason. Without the hot stone, you could not say the sun is the cause. Without the sun, you could not say the hot stone is caused by it. Without the agency of the mind, the aid and active agency of the mind, you could not say the sun is the cause of the hot stone. This purpose, it is decided by the mind. In the very first instance, you do not accept every vibration that reaches you. It is only your purpose at the moment which decides which vibration you will receive and which you shall ignore. What have you seen by these illustrations? The agency of the mind is paramount. The presence of the sensation is equally paramount. Without the presence of the sensation, mind will act upon what? The mind also acts if there is the object to act upon. This, is the common sense line any one of us would accept. Then he says, how is it made possible? You know of a postman. What the postman does, he collects letters from various letter boxes, takes them to the post office. Our postmaster sahib is here. He will tell you better. Then he carries them in a hall or whatever it may be. There are pigeonhole almirahs. He arranges them, east side, west side, north side, south side, whatever, Delhi, Bombay, whatever it is, whatever their system, he sorts them out. And then they are dispatched. This is the process, isn't it? Okay, thank you. Now see, he does it how? He assigns the proper box how? It is written east, it is written west, it is written north, and whatever it is. Whatever evidence you receive, the mind immediately puts it into the pigeonhole. The pigeonhole is time and space. Time and space. Where did it happen? When did it happen? These are two categories, these are two pigeonholes already built in. Nature has built in these already within us. This material which we receive is put into the proper pigeonhole. Where did it happen? Time is assigned, space is assigned. You can think of no experience apart from time or space. You have got to put it, otherwise it won't be meaningful at all. Time, don't be restive, I am also hungry like you. Time and space are required to be assigned. First you put immediately into the category, a pigeonhole-like thing you can say. It is assigned this time and this space. Then only it will be meaningful, otherwise it won't be meaningful. Having done it, then you establish a relationship between the two. You have made it a perception. When you have assigned it time and space, from sensation it has become a perception. Then you assign relationship, cause and effect, causation, whatever you have to do, you do it. That is why you build construct a concept. In Socrates, we read genuine knowledge is conceptual knowledge. True knowledge, correct knowledge, is conceptual knowledge. It is not sensory knowledge. We have established a relationship, cause and effect relationship amongst the material we have got, and that is how we get the rudiments of knowledge. You are restive, the bell has also rung. It will be improper on my part to detain you further, but it is the most crucial moment. Anyway, Hari Om.